Welcome everybody. Happy New Year. Happy 2023. I hope the start has been pleasant, healthy, and happy for everybody. We're so glad you're able to join us for HdL's latest California sales tax trends and forecast webinar. Cruising along, by way of introduction, I'm Bobby Young, Director of Client Services here at HdL Sales Tax. I'm joined also by Brett Plumley and Tracy Vesley, fellow teammates on our sales tax team. We are all, along with quite a few others, responsible for meeting with clients every quarter to deliver your local sales tax information. Jokingly enough, the three of us were kicking around yesterday and realized that these pictures really maybe don't accurately represent what we look like in 2023, but here we are. You guys get the live version. We're also very pleased here in 2023. Later this year, we're going to be celebrating our 40th year in service for clients throughout California. It is quite the milestone for us. We're happy to be able to help, as you see on the screen, over 500 clients here statewide. And we've got a very blessed client retention rate of over 99%. We're so happy to have you guys as clients, represent you, and be able to help you navigate all of our economic sales tax trends. So let's jump right in to the third quarter results. As you see here on the screen, third quarter. Overall bottom line, 8% growth that we experienced. Quite positive with all of the economic news going on at the time frame. Remember, this is third quarter calendar year, so it's the July, August, September time period. This is when the sales happened. A little flashback, if you will, summer months. Most certainly gas prices were higher, and you see that here, up 22%. But we also experienced other things going on in the economy that, and with all regards, kind of took us by surprise, pleasantly, of where consumers were spending. Most notably, you see these two big categories at the top: autos, transportation, building, construction. Summer months are usually the time when the economy is booming and those types of transactions happening, even with the feds raising interest rates and kind of working through financing being a little bit more expensive, which again, I'll pop in and we'll talk more directly to here in just a little bit. Autos, transportation, building, construction still grew over last summer of 21, which was that post-pandemic rebound that we experienced. And we thought that was phenomenal. Here we went again in 3Q22 with another big jump. So kind of get ready for that news coming to you locally. Then also down here towards the bottom, restaurants and hotels. So thankful we've seen this part of our spending economy really rebound strongly since the pandemic, and it just continued here through the summer of 22. So so glad that we saw those gains overall. So that's really where we get started here in 2022. Remember, as we're talking through this forecast, that third quarter is the start of the fiscal year for many of you, with a July to June fiscal period. So third quarter, they're the very beginning of what will be fiscal year 22-23. So keep that in mind as we go through the forecast and you hear about the results. I'm going to wrap up at the back end what we see coming up over these next couple of fiscal years, but the start of the 2022-2023 fiscal year, very strong, 8% growth. Then on the right side of the screen, you see where it all came from. The major metropolitan areas continue to expand and grow. Bay Area, Southern California get the biggest nods here. San Joaquin and Sacramento continue with their consumer spending, but then also, as we've talked a lot about, we get the consolidation of distribution centers and that online component that is still helping benefit here and was helping benefit through the summer of 22. Whoops, a little bit too far there. So major considerations when the team sat around the table just last month as we got this new third quarter data and started dissecting it, a lot of the topics that we kicked around, we can't avoid inflation and the higher prices of goods, interest rates, and what the feds have done all throughout 2022, most certainly right at the forefront of our minds. Some of the positive aspects, and I'll talk about those that leave us maybe a little bit more optimistic as we look forward, is employment or unemployment, and the unemployment rate being where it's at right now. I'll show that to you. Very positive momentum there, but also debt, personal debt, and savings. I think this is going to be a big reason for that post-pandemic boom that we experienced. So I'll show that to you. The never-ending, especially from the merchants and the distributors, right, is the supply chain issues. Much less focus, and we sat around the table and definitely kicked that around. It seems to be a little bit more on the marketing slash reason for higher prices, and kind of leaving consumers with a little bit of anxiety or fear of missing out, just to be able to capture that sales tax activity rather than a real life. We've got issues at the port like we experienced last year, or distributors from outside the United States and goods coming in. So a little less on that side. Feels a little bit more opportunistic now. And then all of this leading back into us as individuals and the greater overall spending economy as consumer demand and consumer sentiment, and how consumers are going to feel as we continue to move forward. So those are some of the big bullet points that we sat around and talked about. Let's focus really quickly here on unemployment. California unemployment. You see the top of the screen at the far right. The through November, our current our unemployment rate was 4.1%. Extremely low, and with everything considered, right? And you can see obviously the pandemic and the jumps and the continual decline that we've been experiencing. This is where some of the more not so much optimistic, but optimistic, sorry, where some of that side of it resides, is that those folks who want a job likely have a job. There are a lot of jobs still available. As we'll talk about, certain industries that we have can't staff up enough, and this kind of there speaks to the restaurant industry, as many of us experience in going out to eat. So unemployment actually a great thing for our economy, really allowing for folks to continue spending. And then the bottom, coming from by way of Fred, historical comparison of unemployment. Obviously, you see the dramatic rise that happened during the Great Recession, 2009, 10, 11. That had dropped off. Really, where we are now is where we were pre-pandemic with regards to unemployment. 4.1 is exactly where we were at the end of 2019 before COVID came into our lives and then started to dramatically affect unemployment. So really a good thing overall for our economy, the spending economy, and kind of as we think about what's to come out of 2023. Savings and disposable income. I wanted to just touch on this a little bit. Obviously, we're going to hear about it a lot with regards to national news and broadcasting out. Personal savings and debt is kind of going in a inverse relationship, and it is rather low. But I kind of use this as I look at it, our focus on this period here where we saw dramatic increases in personal savings and disposable income. And as we try to contextualize what happened after the pandemic and why we saw this immediate boom, and kind of that fear that, oh my gosh, consumers are way outspending themselves, is maybe they weren't. Maybe they actually saved quite a bit to then be able to spend, and kind of keep it just that simple as we look at savings and disposable income. What does it mean going forward? Obviously, I think a lot of us could roll into that, and we'll talk about it as we move through. Interest rates overall, the unavoidable factor of what the Feds have done throughout 2023. You can see kind of date stamped all of the rate changes that they've put in place, adding up to a total bottom line change of 425 basis points increase in 2022. It's important for us to remember that overall, this is what the Feds have done for interest rates. Because when they start to talk about slowing the rate of increase, this is what we have to remind ourselves, and why, if in 2023 the Feds might raise overall rates maybe 3/4 to 175 to 100 basis points. That'll be dramatically slower than the 425 that we just experienced in 2022. So really kind of setting this as our benchmark to keep in perspective when we talk about interest rates going forward. We've already seen likely the most dramatic parts here in 2020. This is a slide here that I brought back in. We've had it the last, previous couple of quarters, just to remind ourselves when we talk about inflation, does it mean a bad thing for overall sales tax receipts? And kind of everything is intertwined. And even as I start to change the demand feature from strong to maybe more steady demand, it still may otherwise have upward pressure on pricing, which will have upward pressure on overall spending and sales tax revenue or receipts. Also, supply chain bottlenecks, which we talked about, but also labor shortages could have downward pressure on supply, which would then have upward pressure on prices, thereby still having overall upward pressure on spending and sales tax receipts. So these things are intertwined, and it's not until really, if we see one of these, wheels really come to a complete stop or reverse feature where we'll see revenues take a dramatic drop. So it's just something to keep, again, in mind when we're talking about inflation, not always a bad thing when it comes to sales tax receipts. Here, credit card spending, probably should have, took this one up, but those other parts were more kind of, setting the tone for some of the optimistic, some of the pessimistic sides of the economy, obviously interest rates, but then also credit card spending. Yes, it has dramatically jumped overall for consumers, and comparatively speaking, back through the years, here you see kind of in this 30 to 59 range, not quite back to where we were pre Great Recession that then landed such a big drop during the Great Recession, but definitely all credit card spending up across the ranges. But just like I showed on the personal savings slide, what you see here is the dramatic drop that happened in credit card spending. And again, allowing now for consumers to feel comfortable spending again because they had the savings there to be able to spend on the credit cards to then be able to pay off the bills. And it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, wait, everybody is overspending within the economy. So just something for perspective. Yes, we're absolutely watching this and kind of mindful of where consumers are headed. Overall, we do obviously take into consideration inflation, but not necessarily on our annual forecasts. It's more on a cash basis and kind of the activity and the levels of revenue that you're receiving that we focus on. But here, just for perspective of where we see overall local sales tax receipts and the growth, and these dotted lines you see out here, we've got calendar years focused on the bottom. We're just, once we get fourth quarter 22 data, then we'll be able to solid light in that, but this is kind of the lead in for our forecast. Once we inflation adjust it back to 2000, the year 2000, you can see this blue line here over these last maybe 5 years or so. If we kind of look in comparison, we had eclipsed or got back to where we were pre-Great Recession. And then as we come out and where we're going to be forecasting, and obviously all the inflation changes we've experienced were definitely higher than where we were back in 2006. So just for perspective when it comes to inflation. All right. Let's start talking about the forecast and, not just what happened there in 3Q, which we see here, 8% growth overall. Just as a reminder, and we're not necessarily patting ourselves on the back here. We laugh about it most certainly, but where we were forecasting 3Q just last quarter when we were on the webinar, we were at 8.3%. So just a smidge softer than what we were expecting. But I think as we talk about it around the table, hopefully we're experiencing less volatility, less surprises within the economy to be able to more accurately forecast or be able to watch those trends more closely and maybe have them come a little closer to all of our expectations. And this really then speaks to you at the local level when we're forecasting your sales tax, be able to hopefully track and trend a little closer, and just watch out for the bigger anomalies. As you'll see, let's see, right here in 4Q, we do watch obviously cash receipts that have come in to date, but you can see overall we are expecting a fairly solid fourth quarter. 5.5% overall for fourth quarter. Normal holiday shopping period. You can kind of see where we're going to be anticipating certain things from this time period, October, November, December. Still good. And then as you glance out to the right and we start, turn the calendar year to 2023, starting to level off as we finish the fiscal year 22-23, then you start to see an overall negative. And as Tracy and Brett go through the individual categories, you'll see kind of a longer sustained decreases and negatives that we've built in by sector. Overall, what does it mean? Really kind of here towards the back end of the calendar year is when we expect a lot of the inflation and interest rate increases to have a bigger effect back on our overall results as an economy, but still just kind of slowing down. I would say, again, we talk about it, and the R word of recession was most certainly a topic that we discussed. It's not really what we're saying here. We're not in a position, nor do we have data or feel like the economy is in a full pullback recessionary state. Really more of a slowdown. So as we prepare budgets for our clients and we talk with you over the next couple of months, for many of you, that's what it's going to probably be looking like. It's a little bit more of a slowdown rather than a full recession. And then starting getting back to something a little bit more positive as you see here on the report going out to 24. Breaking that down between the place of sale, which is POS, and kind of those local results, you'll see kind of, again, throughout 2023, a little longer sustained, slight decrease to flat results expected, where total overall is up above. And the reason, most notably, as Tracy will talk about in just a little bit, is still sustained growth out of the pools versus your local businesses directly. So again, a little bit of lead in here for what's to come. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Brett to start talking about autos.
Thank you, Bobby. And we're going to get into all of the major industry groups now. And as Bobby mentioned, we have positive news in every sector in this third quarter 22, starting with autos and transportation. And this first chart that you show is about prices. And as we've been talking about the last several quarters, pricing has been the biggest positive impact on the sales tax in this sector. As we look at third quarter 22, prices are still going up, but the increase is slowing down. The year over year growth in prices slowed in both the second quarter 22, it was up 13.5%, and third quarter 22 up 9.6%, but it remains significantly elevated. The increases the past two quarters were slower compared to the first quarter of 22, when the prices were up 22.8%. When we talk about the trends in this sector, there is now clearly evidence of a slowing of demand, but the California Auto Outlook is anticipating more than 5% increase in registrations in calendar year 2023. We've been talking about the drop in volume, and it overall dropped significantly vehicles in 2022, but we do anticipate that an easing in one of those factors that Bobby was talking about, supply chain issues, combined with higher interest rates, is going to moderate the prices in 2023. So we've got some, from a consumer standpoint, some good news there. When we look at the overall forecast, we had projected 8%. The actual was very positive, almost 6% increase in the quarter. And The overall summary is inventory is finally increasing from historic lows due to that easing of supply chain disruptions that Bobby had talked about. Lack of inventory, which had caused prices for the new and used vehicles to soar, it's really not as much of an issue now. We're seeing expensive branded trucks for those agencies, those of your agencies that have a significant amount of sales tax being generated from trucks. They're in strong demand, and we're looking at an increase, observing that in the dealer lots. Used car prices are now declining. Financing costs are continuing to escalate. And when you combine all of these factors, this is expected to crimp auto demand and result in a minor dip. So we've had significant growth going all the way back to the pandemic and post-pandemic, and another positive quarter this quarter. We are anticipating one more positive quarter. You can see fourth quarter 22, 5% growth, and then a flattening out in the first couple of quarters of this calendar year that we're now living in. And we are going to experience, we're anticipating in the forecast, a 3% overall reduction in this sector for fiscal year 23-24. And then when we look at the out years, 24-25, all the way out to 27-28, we're back to more normal annualized levels of growth, 3% projected all the way out into the long term. So now we're going to talk about fuel and service stations, that sector, which has continued to grow significantly. As Bobby mentioned, another positive impact on the overall forecast is coming from this sector. The global inventory of oil, which we're looking at here, when we look at crude oil prices, they're expected to fall slightly in the first half of 23 and pick up throughout the second half. The WTI, or the West Texas Intermediate crude oil that we base the pump prices on primarily, is expected to average roughly $85 in 2023. And I was talking to Bobby this morning. This fluctuates so significantly. It was at $80 a barrel yesterday, down to 77 by the end of the day, and 73 when I looked about half an hour ago. So it just demonstrates how significantly, how wild the fluctuation is in the WTI prices. The forecast calls for an average production year for U.S. refineries, and there has been the ban on Russian petroleum products, and that is going to continue to provide some price uncertainty. The average pump price that has played such a significant role in continuing to boost the sales tax generated, and that's kind of a common theme. As Bobby has talked about, one of those boxes that he highlighted is demand, consumer demand. Consumer demand really has driven up the sales tax in almost every major industry group, and this is one of those key categories where the pricing has really significantly contributed to the sales tax. The pump prices, they peaked in the second quarter of 22, but they're still well above year-ago levels. And the prices are continuing now to fall. They've been falling, and that we can expect to have some local tax declines in this segment as it rebalances from 2022 price impacts. So when we look at the overall forecast in this sector here, we can see the actual results were almost 22% increase in the third quarter 22. We had projected 35%, so we didn't quite hit that mark, but still really positive growth. And now, in summary, the sector is experiencing downward pressure in all factors. Prices at the pump, they got to the lowest point at the end of calendar year 22. Other factors pushing sales tax associated in this sector down are reduced oil barrel prices. Diesel and jet fuel prices have been down. There's been a paring back on another one of those boxes that we highlight, the consumption and demand for fuel, and the volatility that Bobby mentioned tied to those Federal Reserve rate increases. As a result, we have lowered our forecast for the next 3 quarters. So what you can see here, we've got one more positive quarter in the fourth quarter 22, and then 6 quarters in a row there of drops. So first and second quarter 23 down 10%, 15%. And then all of fiscal year 23-24, we've got an almost 8% reduction built into our statewide forecast. Long term, when we're looking at the out years 24-25, that is flat, and then back to normal annualized increases between 25-26 all the way out to 27-28. We've got a 2% projected increase there in this sector. Now we're going to talk about building and construction, and another really positive growth was experienced in this sector once again. Some of the factors here, construction factors and other macro factors that we want to talk about. The Federal Reserve Bank has continued, as we've talked about, to increase those rates, federal fund rates at 4.5%. I saw one of the questions, and I saw we had we had Jim respond and Joan respond to help give some background, some history. And Federal Reserve rates are really now, we have to go back to 2007. They're at the highest level now since 2007. So they're at 4.5%, prime rate at 7.5%. What that means in this sector is homeowners, we're anticipating they're going to stay put and invest in the nest, and that's going to lead to positive results from home improvements. And we see that in this sector mainly in building and materials, the biggest business type within building and construction, and an anticipated increase in the sales tax associated. So higher mortgage rates is good for home improvement centers. We have the 30-year, 15-year rates increasing and higher than they were last quarter. And we also are expecting new projects in 2023 resulting from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act. So that's going to play a really positive factor throughout this calendar year we're anticipating on this sector. When we look at the overall forecast, you can see, positive growth that we experienced, 7.8%, and we had projected, as Bobby talked about, pretty much hitting the target throughout most of the sectors this quarter. We had 7.5% projected and came out 7.8%. We have one more positive quarter anticipated. 8% is forecast in fourth quarter 22. And what's happening, inflation has been driving the results at the moment. Prices for concrete, steel, copper, electrical system components, and lumber are still elevated, and they're well above the pre-pandemic levels. The demand for the home improvement sector is still very strong. Prices of material are expected to decline in 2023. And that's why you see really a significant flattening out 6 quarters in a row there. The remainder of calendar year 2023 and on into the next fiscal year, as housing starts begin to slow, infrastructure projects which offset those drops are going to expand with that Infrastructure Act federal funding that I mentioned. As a result of the combination of all of these factors, we have that one more projected quarter of growth followed by a flattening out through 23-24. And then when we get out to the out years 24-25 through 27-28, we have normal annualized levels of growth projected, 4.5% to 5% annually from 24-25 through 27-28. Food and drugs, this is really one of the most stable sectors, and it has been going all the way back to the pandemic. It also is, as a reminder, it's the smallest sector on average throughout the state. And we had projected 2% growth. The actual results very flat in the quarter at 0.4%. The sector is flattening out. There was a gain in the third quarter 22 coming from grocery stores, and that was offset by a drop from the cannabis related businesses and those sales. The prices of food, although they're increasing, as Bobby had mentioned, and Tracy will talk about that, or Bobby will talk about that as we go forward, and we talk about restaurants and hotels, most of food sales are non-taxable. The higher costs of groceries are pushing the consumers to eat out more, and we'll see that when we talk about restaurants. Long term, we are continuing to forecast annual 2% growth in this sector. And with that, I'll hand it over to Tracy.
All right. Hi there. Happy New Year. I see in the chat a lot of people are saying Happy New Year 2023. We are positive today. It's mostly good news for third quarter. I am going to talk about a few of the bigger groups here. Let's start with general consumer goods. This group really encompasses retail statewide, comprised of about 28 different categories, from discount department stores, which is one of the largest, down to jewelry stores, pet stores, etc. The slide on the screen right now is depicting the top 10 categories by dollars, about 90% of the group's total revenues. And as I mentioned, maybe I didn't mention it, we keep saying this, pretty close in our forecast with general consumer goods. I think we forecasted growth of 2.8%. It came in at 2.9% for the third quarter results. You can see on the screen, discount department stores is at 10.6% growth over a year ago. A couple things going on there. Let's pull them out of the mix. And if we did that, overall, general consumer goods would actually be down 0.5%. So starting to see some slowing in consumer spending in the third quarter. It was trending that way a little bit in second quarter. Discount department stores are propping up this group, and a big component of that is fuel. So we have a lot of big discount department stores that have fuel pumps on premises and are a part of their sales tax reporting. And that is what is driving a big chunk, a little over half of that 10.6% growth. Doing a little math, because it's hard to tell precisely since these get reported together. But if we pull fuel out of the discount department store mix, its growth is really closer to 5%, and partially boosted by some brick and mortar stores filling online orders. So definitely a shift in brick and mortar shopping starting in the second quarter. So it's slowing down, but it's coming off some really big highs. So it's really not all that negative. This slide on the screen is just kind of a quick look. This is MasterCard Spending Pulse. This is that organization. Of course, they have a pretty good hand on the pulse of what spending is looking like, particularly online. But with credit card transactions, they were looking forward into preliminary holiday results. Couple big takeaways here. Definitely a balance of spending related to goods and experiences. The consumer is not all goods anymore. We were during the pandemic, that's all we could do. And now there's certainly a shift to experiences. We see on this chart, restaurants up, projecting to be up by MasterCard 15.1%. And definitely restaurants were up in third quarter. We're projecting that going forward as well. And that's more on the experience side. Little shift away from spending on goods like electronics and jewelry. I've said this a couple times. Some of these industries really had their 15 minutes of fame during the pandemic, now coming back to some more normalized levels. All right, looking at general consumer goods growth trends. I already mentioned this, but definitely we can see this big hump here in second quarter of 21, a big spending surge, and then coming back down in third quarter of 21 and leveling down up until the current quarter that we're talking about, third quarter of 22. Seeing flat or contraction in some of the larger categories, including department stores, family apparel, home furnishings, specialty stores. Specialty stores include things like pet stores, beauty stores, some of those odds and ends that don't really fit in the bigger categories. So certainly some slowing happening there. Looking at the forecast for general retail or general consumer goods, and again, we're talking brick and mortar here. This is going into the store and buying stuff. As I mentioned, third quarter came in at 2.9%. We projected 2.8%, so we were pretty darn close there. Looking forward at fourth quarter, growth of about 1.5%. So we're coming down in that forecast. This is coming off some big double-digit growth the year prior, right? When we look at fourth quarter of 21. So really starting to pull back. You know, a lot of things are impacting buyer choices right now. Bobby discussed most of these. Interest rates are high. Our spending is now being dictated by available cash. So we don't have as much in savings, and we were depleting that, and now we're putting more on credit cards. So I think there's some purchasing decisions around that bubble of spending that is driving our forecast a little bit. So coming down to 1.5% growth, again, it's still growth, flat in the first quarter of 23, and then we see a step down of 1% going forward. A lot of this not only is just local spending in the stores, but it is also a decline in gas prices. As I mentioned earlier, discount department stores are one of the largest groups in this largest category in this group, and gas prices are driving a lot of those positive results. As we anticipate gas prices to continue to come down, we'll see that impact on the net sales tax. So that is one of the factors that are contributing to that 1% decrease all through pretty much all through calendar year 23, and then we slowly start to come back as we go into calendar year 24. Let's shift a little bit and talk about the countywide pools. So general consumer goods, brick and mortar shopping, countywide pools, this is indirect allocation of spending. Each agency gets a proportional share of the pool based on their Bradley Burns sales tax. The slide on the screen right now is showing general consumer goods, which is green, compared to all of the other major industry groups, which are in blue. And we can see general consumer goods, you know, from third quarter 2019, huge boost in sales tax growth here from fourth quarter 19 to fourth quarter 20. This is AB 147, Marketplace Facilitators Act, and it is also our frenzied pandemic spending during that period of time. General consumer goods was the lion's share of revenues coming into the pools, and all the other major industry groups in blue down here. And then kind of first quarter 21, we cross. Part of this is attributed to a chunk of the pool revenues now coming out of the pools, going into direct allocation. So we see this decrease here. But we're also seeing a big growth in the other industry groups here compared to general consumer goods. A big part of this is related to business and industry and its impact on pool revenue. Looking at business and industry, it is definitely growing more than the other groups that contribute to the pool. So the pool revenues, we break them out by the same major industry groups we do for the Bradley Burns sales tax. And here you can see business and industry up 10% in growth compared to a year ago. General consumer goods down 1.5%. General consumer goods are still the largest chunk of revenues in the pools, but their growth is negative compared to the business and industry. Now, just to clarify, not to be confused with the 2.9% in general consumer goods in the brick and mortar Bradley Burns that I just spoke about. This is general consumer goods in the pools and largely related to online activity, if not entirely. Okay, so looking at again, focusing on business and industry, the big categories in B&I that are driving the pool revenues, these top, I think this is 6, medical, biotech, huge, light and heavy industry, office equipment purchases, as well as a big electrical equipment purchases, often related to the energy sector. And then lastly, office equipment. A lot of office equipment purchases this last couple of quarters, largely, I think, attributed to people coming back into the office, businesses refiguring their office models, and a lot of, and part of that too is infrastructure for IT. So we're seeing a lot of IT purchases in that area as well. So you can see B&I very, very strong these last year and a half in the pools. Okay, looking at the pools forecast, again, pretty close. We projected 6% in growth for the pools. We came in at 7.4% for the quarter. Very similar to preceding quarters. Private party auto sales, really strong. So that is a big component of the pools, is private party auto sales through the DMV, very strong. You know, we're seeing auto sales starting to soften. Brett he discussed this a moment ago, and anticipating a little bit of softening going forward with regard to third-party sales. We can see fourth quarter is still pretty strong at 7%, and then coming down to 4% and 5% in the succeeding quarters. As a point of reference, e-commerce makes up about 1/6 of the total county pool revenues. We do anticipate e-commerce is here to stay. It will continue to grow and is part of this growth here. Let's shift gears and talk about the business and industry group as part of the Bradley Burns sales tax. So I went from Bradley Burns to the pools. Now I'm back to Bradley Burns, focusing a lot on business and industry. This is a group that has kind of been front and center this last year. Fulfillment centers fall into this group. They are the largest business type in the fulfillment center group. They comprise about 24% of the revenues for the entire business and industry group. It grew 11.5% for the quarter, more than I thought it would. This is the one group where our projections were a little bit different. Looking at fulfillment centers, we see this pretty big growth here from fourth quarter 19 to fourth quarter 20. This is AB1, I mentioned this already. This is AB 147. This is marketplace facilitators. This is pandemic spending. And then we get into first quarter of 21, and which shoots right back up again, huge growth. This is related to that shift of some pool revenues coming out of the pools into direct allocation related to California fulfillment centers and orders being filled for California in these fulfillment centers. Therefore, they are considered a place of sale. So revenue really shot up. This has really changed the complexion of the business and industry group, with now fulfillment centers taking up almost 25% of the total revenues. So that's where that growth is. And then coming down to first quarter of 22, we see a stabilization. We're at a new base now for growth. And we, while we still saw growth in the third quarter of 22, we expect going forward pretty stable growth in fulfillment centers. All right, looking at the business and industry group as a whole, top business types in this group are on the screen. The group itself has 21 different, very diverse business types that contribute, ranging from motion pictures equipment, winery equipment, to medical, biotech, industrial, business to business. You can see lots of different factors coming into this group. Medical, biotech, huge in the group, along with heavy and light industry. I tend to group them together. Lots of growth. Pretty much every key group saw growth in the quarter. These top 10 averaging growth of about 9.4% in the third quarter. The only group in this top 10 that did not grow was garden and agricultural supplies, down just a little bit. Farming, construction, and equipment was up. So there's a little bit of a distinction between those two categories. All right, industry trends. California fulfillment centers continue to grow. We are filling more and more online and remote seller orders out of our California fulfillment centers. This is boosting those direct allocations. And do anticipate that to continue at a pretty even trend line. Pharma construction equipment and continue to be in demand. That group was up in third quarter. I mentioned agricultural supplies down. These two groups definitely driven by seasonality and certainly now driven by the impacts of the drought, although right now with all the rain and the storms doesn't feel like a drought. But that drought is still there, and farming and agricultural shifting their business models, buying equipment to accommodate that. Pharmaceutical and biotech definitely got a boost from COVID. Huge boost from the vaccines and the research around that. That continues. Vaccine research is still very strong. And with that, something we don't talk about as much these days, but crop research is very strong in the biotechnology industry. We're seeing spending in that sector as well. In industry, the ISM, which is the Institute for Supply Management, the manufacturing index is leaned on heavily in this industry, kind of as, bellwether to see where things are going. It actually contracted for the first time in 29 months. And part of that is just reporting a slight softening in demand. I think partially a result of higher interest rates, more difficult to acquire affordable loans for big projects. However, even with this little bit of warning, the industrial sector continues to be strong. Looking at the forecast for business and industry, third quarter of 22 came in at 9.7%. We projected 5%. So this is the one group where our projections were definitely far more conservative than the actual results. Part of that in business and industry, fulfillment centers are up 11.5%, as I mentioned. Part of what drove some of that change is some of those pre-holiday sales happened in the third quarter, where in the past they've been in the second quarter. So that drove a little bit of revenues higher than what we had initially anticipated. Going forward, still seeing strength in the fourth quarter, up 6%, not double-digit growth, but fairly strong. Leveling down going into 2023. Definitely more modest growth, more in the 2% range going forward. Not seeing a rebound until we get into 24-25 fiscal year, up into about the 3% range of growth. So again, third quarter was pretty high. A lot of one-time project buying still happening in the third quarter. Okay. I'm going to shift, and I'm going to talk about restaurants and hotels, which I call food and fun, my favorite category. Lots going on here too. Definitely a different group than business and industry. Cost for groceries continues to push consumers into restaurants. So food at home is up 13.2%. Food away from home up 8% as far as cost. I know when Brett was talking about food and drugs, how it came in third quarter less than 1%, definitely modest growth. I think part of that is during the third quarter, we were out at the restaurants, we were out experiencing the fun of going out to dine. Leisure and entertainment experiences are in demand, are back. I mentioned that earlier. Just overall spending, folks are certainly looking at experiences over goods or balancing the two. And, I mentioned earlier the MasterCard Spending Plus report slide that I threw on the screen. Restaurants, they were forecasting up 15% nationally. We're falling in line with that. And that just kind of comes into that leisure and entertainment sector we are looking toward definitely experiences. Another area very, I would say unique to California, but I feel like there's wineries across the world now or across the nation. But in California, wine is a big industry for us. Wine tasting fees more than doubled in the last 6 years. Part of that is related to labor costs, supply chain challenges. Wine bottles were really hard to acquire for a period of time, and the inflationary factors. So wine tasting fees are up, wine costs are up. Still an area of purchasing though. We're still buying and drinking wine. Hotels are doing well. They're coming back. Occupancy is expected to reach recovery in 2023, pretty much close to pre-pandemic levels. The only sector that is really kind of struggling is business. Recreational travel is back. We are out doing stuff, back to that experience component, right? Business sector travel a little slower, international travel into the country a little slower, but certainly rebounding. Hospitality industry's margins a little tighter than they've been previously, but as folks travel more, we're seeing that sector rebound. Huge increases in third quarter for the hotel sector. Looking forward, this slide is looking at cash receipts as posted by the CDTFA for, what is it? October and November, months 10 and 11. I have to think about that for a second. So this is just raw gross cash. We don't have the data behind this. I can't tell you exactly what's driving this, but for their category of food services and drinking places, we're up 9% in October, 8% in November. Definitely seeing growth in this sector, looking forward into the fourth quarter. So when we look at the restaurant and hotels forecast, that's what we're seeing. Third quarter was up 10.2%. We anticipated 9%. We were pretty close. Looking at fourth quarter to be strong, and we just looked at some of the cash data that supports that. 10% growth in fourth quarter, 11% in this quarter that we're in right now, first quarter 23, and then just really leveling off at a higher baseline, growth at 4% second quarter, and then 2%, 3% going forward. Okay, with that, I am going to turn it back to Bobby, and he is going to wrap this all up.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And thanks, Brett, also for both of you guys communicating such great information and the levels of the details. For all attendees, this is kind of where we go when we get new data and kind of how we dig through it. While the three of us probably look good because we're the ones presenting it to you, I want to take an opportunity to really thank the rest of our team, the folks that you see and some of the folks that you don't see, who end up giving us, really digging in, giving us all this information to give and provide to you guys these levels of details that wouldn't be possible just alone. So just want to say a big thanks to our entire team at this point. So let's go ahead and land this plane. We're getting close to the noon hour. Get you guys out for lunch. As you see on the screen, overall, now talking about the fiscal year and kind of then combining everything that we just heard from Brett and Tracy. Here for fiscal year 22-23 on a statewide basis, almost 4% growth, has just about everything to do with the first half of the fiscal year, then the July through the December period, and the positive growth that we've got there. 23, and you can really see here in the red circle, 23-24 is where we're getting down closer to what we're anticipating right now, more flat results out of that fiscal year. I know for many of you, as expenditures continue to go up, if you experience flat growth out of fiscal year 23-24, it's probably going to feel like a recession, or you're going to feel that slowdown. And it's why we're kind of not talking about a recession, even though slowing of revenues is gonna kind of feel that way. but still flat. And then once we go out into fiscal year 24, 25 and beyond, getting back into normal historical growth patterns. I think it's a constant reminder, at least for us, that November 2024 is going to be another national election. And really, when we talk about the Feds and what's going on with interest rates right now and kind of them having their pulse on the economy, we can't lose sight of the fact that they will want to continue as it works towards a national election to keep the economy in good fashion. There will be many who will want the economy even stronger than it is right now in a lead up to 2024. I think we got to keep that in mind when we're talking about sales tax and what we expect out of receipts. I have then, now I kind of look to the Feds and how much they've responded to cool inflation for the overall economy. Is if we do fall back and if there are certain markers that they don't like, I think there's more propensity to then reduce interest rates and try to stimulate the economy. And that's, again, what gives me a little bit of hope and optimism as we look in those, coming periods of maybe not falling back into a complete recession, because the Feds and as we saw during the pandemic, we've talked a lot about it. See Washington and Congress really be responsive to keep an economy going. So that's really what we've got in the short run coming up. As we look back, and we've gotten a lot of these questions of, okay, if we go into a slowdown, what does it look like, feel back? This graph right here is a constant reminder, at least for me, looking back into 2019 when we completely closed the economy there at the end of the fiscal year, the second quarter, and we ended up with down only 2%. Obviously, we've seen all this growth post-pandemic periods. Yeah, okay, are we going to go back to 2019 levels? I think it's really important to kind of keep note of what dollars we're talking about now. Back in 1920, which is the mark here, we were about 7 billion overall statewide receipts. And you can see here for fiscal year 21-22, with that, which was already wrapped up, or kind of in more of the 9 range. Are we going to go back to 2019 levels? Not likely. A higher price of goods, wages likely, and we talked there about unemployment being low and employment being high. Is no, there's availability to be able to spend and buy at this at the level that we are right now, which then leaves receipts back up at this level. So that's how overall dollar receipts kind of trend out with these growth factors up above. So I think that's about it as far as some of those high points. Q&A. Shay had a question that we had in the chat feature. Let me go ahead and reiterate that. Do you feel like upward pressure on prices impacting essentials such as grocery, food, hygiene, dining, fuel, etc., is resulting in reductions in desires, wants, such as electronics, designer apparel, and jewelry? Shay, absolutely. And hopefully, especially as Tracy talked through general consumer goods, and you hear Brett talk about autos, most certainly, I think when we think about the California spending economy, there's two pieces to it. There's demand spending and discretionary spending. Demand is the everyday goods that we have to buy just to live. It's kind of where we're at. When we talk about autos, we are car country, California. Everybody has a car to be able to get to and from and commute around. So yeah, that's a part now a little bit more on the demand side than it is the discretionary side, right? With autos. But we really do try to consider, both those pieces. And as you see in the forecast and that inevitable slowing, as consumers start to reconfigure what their demand, or reconfigure both, what is their demand spending and then how much will they have left over for discretionary purchases, the likelihood more is going to be placed on demand spending, less on discretionary. And that's what's really in certain categories going to cool off the growth that we've seen, even go negative for thereby parts of 2023. So most certainly believe it's going to be the case, and that's why we've cooled off our expectations for the economy, or at least for receipts. So hope that helps there. Shay, getting in another question there. Do you think consumer sentiment will eventually be affected by lower quality customer service, impacted by tight labor and unemployment and low unemployment? That's definitely a piece of the consumer sentiment perspective, right? Is that quality level of service. I see it a lot when when I read, kind of feelings about tipping in restaurants or just counter service, and what should that be? Is it really reflective of the service that we're getting? The interesting point, though, I think to keep in mind, if you're getting poor service from one location, if you as a consumer shift to another location, you're still spending. And I think that's where, when it comes to the forecast overall, is you've still spent. And that's really what's going to keep sales tax going up. So it's less of a tangible, correlation, especially if the consumer still spends somewhere. For myself, Brett, and Tracy, we thank you so much for attending here on the webinar today. Hope your 2023 has started off in a good fashion. Hopefully you can keep that up, especially as you grind through your budget meetings and kind of future presentations. Feel free to reach out to us, both, myself, Brett, or Tracy, or any of our team members that you have email and contact information for. Feel free to reach out to us. We'll do our best to help you as much as we can. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day.
Goodbye.
Bye.